The Western was never about heroes. It was about survival, about violence that lingered long after the gun smoke cleared. Clint Eastwood understood this better than anyone because he lived inside the genre long enough to see its lies rot from the inside. These are the Westerns he calls masterpieces, not because they are entertaining, but because they are brutal. Number 14, Shane, 1953. At first glance, Shane looks almost gentle. Wide skies, clean faces, a quiet stranger who rides into a peaceful valley. For decades it was sold as a wholesome Western, even a family film. But Clint Eastwood has repeatedly pointed out that Shane is something far darker than its reputation suggests. It is a story about violence that cannot be unlearned. Shane himself is not a savior. He is a man running from what he knows he is capable of. The film's brutality is not graphic, it is psychological. Every time Shane reaches for a gun, the movie pauses, as if asking whether this moment will permanently poison the land he is trying to protect. Eastwood has cited this restraint as one of the film's greatest strengths. Violence here is not thrilling, it is inevitable and tragic. The final gunfight is short, clean, and devastating. There is no triumph, no celebration. Only a child screaming for a man who already knows he cannot stay. That is the cruelty of Shane. The hero must leave so that the myth of peace can survive. His presence alone is a reminder that blood was required to make this place safe. What makes Shane brutal is its emotional honesty. It understands that the Western hero does not build the future. He poisons it, even when his intentions are good. Eastwood absorbed this lesson deeply. You can see it echoed decades later in Unforgiven, where the cost of violence is no longer hidden behind clean shirts and soft music. Shane is not violent in what it shows. It is violent in what it refuses to let you forget. Number 13, My Darling Clementine, 1946. John Ford's My Darling Clementine is often remembered for its elegance, its compositions, its quiet dignity. But Clint Eastwood has always emphasized that beneath its poetic surface lies a Western soaked in death and moral fatigue. This is not a story about justice being served. It is a story about order barely holding together. Wyatt Earp in this film is not a swaggering lawman. He is tired, measured, though already aware that violence is a language this town understands better than law. The brutality of My Darling Clementine is subtle but constant. Every conversation feels like it could collapse into gunfire. Every smile feels temporary. The infamous gunfight at the OK Corral is not explosive. It is bleak, short, almost routine. That is what makes it disturbing. Killing here is procedural, necessary, emotionless. Eastwood admired this approach because it strips violence of romance. There is no victory parade, only bodies and the quiet understanding that nothing has truly been resolved. Ford fills the film with empty spaces and long silences. Graves sit in the background, wind moves through abandoned streets. Death is not shocking because it is expected. This is a world where men already know how they are likely to end. Mike Eastwood took this lesson to heart. In his own westerns, death is rarely dramatic. It simply arrives. My Darling Clementine understands that the frontier does not reward righteousness. It merely tolerates it for a while. Its brutality lies in its calm acceptance of mortality, a reminder that in the West, survival was never guaranteed, only delayed. Number 12, Winchester 73, 1950. Winchester 73 is one of the most quietly vicious westerns ever made. Clint Eastwood has praised it for stripping violence down to cause and effect. No speeches, no moral safety net. Just a rifle moving from hand to hand, leaving blood behind it wherever it goes. The film's brutality comes from its structure. The Winchester rifle is treated almost like a cursed object. Each new owner believes it will bring power, protection, or redemption. Instead, it brings death. The weapon passes through criminals, soldiers, native warriors, and lawmen, and every transition is marked by violence that feels arbitrary and cruel. Eastwood admired this because it mirrors the real West. Violence was not heroic, it was contagious. James Stewart's performance is especially cold by Western standards. His obsession drives the story forward with a relentless intensity. There is no warmth in his pursuit, no humor, just fixation. Eastwood later echoed this emotional restraint in his own Western characters, where revenge is not cathartic but corrosive. What makes Winchester 73 brutal is its refusal to assign moral ownership to violence. Good men use the rifle, bad men use it. The outcome is the same. The gun does not care who pulls the trigger, it simply works. This idea would become central to Eastwood's worldview as a filmmaker. Violence is not righteous because the right person commits it. It is still violence. The film also dismantles the idea of progress. The West is not moving towards civilization. It is cycling through the same brutality with different faces. Each new setting feels just as dangerous as the last. The rifle's journey suggests that the tools of violence outlive the men who wield them. By the time the story closes, there is no sense of triumph, only exhaustion. The Winchester survives, men do not. That imbalance is the film's most unsettling truth, and one Eastwood never forgot. Number 11. Ride the High Country, 1962. On paper, Ride the High Country looks like a farewell tour for aging Western heroes. In reality, it is one of the genre's most emotionally punishing films. Clint Eastwood has frequently singled it out for its honesty about decay, both physical and moral. The brutality here is not explosive, it is humiliating. Joel McCrea and Randolph Scott play men whose values no longer fit the world they helped create. Every step they take feels heavier. Every decision feels compromised. Eastwood was drawn to this because it exposes the lie at the heart of the Western myth. Time does not honor heroes. It erases them. Violence in the film is awkward and painful. Fights are clumsy. Gunplay is desperate. When brutality erupts, it feels less like action and more like survival. There is no glory left in it, only necessity. Eastwood would later build entire films around this idea, especially Unforgiven, all where aging bodies and outdated codes collide with modern cruelty. The most disturbing sequences involve social brutality rather than physical harm, public humiliation, broken promises, men forced to watch their principles mocked by a world that has moved on. The West here is not lawless, it is indifferent. That indifference is far more devastating than chaos. The final act delivers violence not as a climax, but as a reckoning. Characters are forced to decide what their values are worth when there is nothing left to gain. Death arrives quietly, without spectacle. Eastwood admired this restraint because it treats violence as consequence, not entertainment. Ride the High Country is brutal because it denies the audience comfort. It tells us that honor does not guarantee survival. On that doing the right thing may only ensure you die tired and forgotten. Few Westerns are brave enough to admit that. Fewer still make it feel this real. Number 10. Fort Apache, 1948. Fort Apache is brutal because it exposes how violence is manufactured by authority and then buried beneath legend. Clint Eastwood has long admired this film for its ruthless dismantling of military heroism. It is not a Western about frontier danger. It is a Western about arrogance getting men killed. Henry Fonda's Colonel Thursday is one of the most chilling figures in the genre. He is not cruel in a traditional sense. He is polite, educated, certain. That certainty is what makes him deadly. He refuses to listen to warnings. He dismisses experience. He treats the West like a stage for personal glory. Now, Eastwood has pointed out that this kind of violence is the most dangerous because it arrives wearing respectability. The film's brutality builds slowly. Each decision pushes the fort closer to catastrophe. There are no sudden turns, no shocking betrayals, just a steady march toward disaster driven by ego and denial. When violence finally explodes, it feels inevitable. The massacre is not shown in graphic detail, but its impact is devastating. Men die not because they were outmatched, but because they were misled. What makes Fort Apache especially cruel is what happens afterward. The truth is suppressed. The dead are transformed into heroes. The failure is reframed as noble sacrifice. Eastwood has cited this ending as one of the most honest in Western history. Violence does not end with the gunfire. Yes, it continues in the lies told to justify it. This idea deeply influenced Eastwood's own films, where institutions often protect their image at the expense of human truth. Fort Apache understands that brutality is not just physical, it is historical. It is what happens when reality is rewritten, so the same mistakes can be repeated. The West here is not wild, it is bureaucratic. And that may be the film's darkest insight. Violence does not require chaos. It only requires someone in charge who refuses to listen. Number 9. The Oxbow Incident, 1943. Few Westerns are as emotionally devastating as The Oxbow Incident. Clint Eastwood has openly praised it as one of the genre's most merciless moral examinations. There are no gunfights for glory, no last-minute rescues. Just ordinary people committing irreversible violence because it feels necessary. The film's brutality comes from its simplicity. A rumor spreads. Fear takes hold. A mob forms. Each man convinces himself he is not responsible because everyone else agrees. Eastwood has often emphasized that this is the most honest depiction of frontier violence ever put on screen. Not lawlessness, but consensus. The hangings are not stylized. They are awkward, prolonged, painful to watch. Victims plead, bystanders look away. The camera does not flinch. There is no music to soften the moment. Violence here is not fast. It lingers. It forces the audience to sit with the consequences. What makes the film unbearable is what comes after, the realization that the men were innocent, that nothing can be undone. There is no villain left to punish, only guilt. And Eastwood has said this is where the film truly becomes brutal. Violence does not end when the rope tightens. It follows the survivors forever. The final letter read aloud near the end is one of the most crushing moments in Western cinema. It does not accuse, it does not threaten. It simply asks the living to remember what they have done. Eastwood carried this lesson into his own work repeatedly. Violence leaves scars even on those who believe they were right. The Oxbow incident is brutal because it offers no escape, no redemption arc, no myth to hide behind. Only the knowledge that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary cruelty when fear replaces thought. Number 8. The Naked Spur, 1953. The Naked Spur is one of the most psychologically violent westerns ever made. Clint Eastwood has repeatedly admired it, not for scale or spectacle, but for how ruthlessly it strips men down to their ugliest instincts. This is not a story about the frontier. It is a story about what obsession does to the human soul. James Stewart's Howard Kemp is not a hero chasing justice. He is a man consumed by greed and betrayal. Every decision he makes is warped by a single goal: money, revenge, validation. Eastwood has pointed to this character as a turning point in Western morality. Kemp is technically on the right side of the law, yet everything about his behavior feels corrosive. The film dares the audience to ask whether legality and morality have anything to do with each other at all. The brutality in The Naked Spur is intimate. Violence happens up close. Hands grapple, faces contort. The camera stays tight, forcing us to experience the discomfort alongside the characters. Even moments without physical violence are suffocating. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every alliance feels temporary. Trust dissolves almost instantly. What makes the film especially cruel is how it weaponizes human weakness. Characters manipulate affection, fear, and guilt to survive. The bounty hunter system itself becomes a moral trap. Eastwood later echoed this idea in Unforgiven, where killing is treated not as a duty, but as a moral infection that spreads through everyone involved. The film's landscapes are beautiful, but they offer no comfort. Mountains loom like judgment. Rivers threaten death. Nature does not cleanse the characters. It reflects their isolation. By the final act, everyone feels exhausted, emotionally and physically. Dragged forward by choices they can no longer undo. The true brutality of The Naked Spur lies in its conclusion. Resolution does not bring relief. It brings awareness, the realization that something essential has been lost forever. Eastwood understood this deeply. Violence here is not about survival. It is about erosion. Each act strips away dignity, empathy, and self-respect until nothing clean remains. This is a Western that punishes its characters for every compromise they make, and it never pretends that survival is the same thing as victory. Number 7. Red River, 1948. Red River is brutal because it shows how power turns men monstrous long before the gunfire begins. Clint Eastwood has often cited the film as a blueprint for authority-driven violence in Westerns. This is not a clash between good and evil. It is a slow descent into tyranny disguised as leadership. John Wayne's Tom Dunson is one of the most terrifying figures in the genre, precisely because he believes he is right. His obsession with control poisons everything around him. Eastwood has remarked that Dunson represents the dark side of frontier mythmaking, the idea that strength alone justifies command, that brutality is acceptable if it produces results. Violence in Red River is relentless and grinding. It is not explosive, it is procedural. Whippings, threats. Executions ordered as discipline. Men are broken not by sudden chaos, but by constant pressure. The cattle drive becomes a moving prison where dissent is punished and obedience is enforced through fear. What makes the film especially savage is the emotional violence inflicted on Dunson's adopted son. Their relationship deteriorates into psychological warfare. Loyalty is demanded, not earned. Love is conditional. Eastwood absorbed this dynamic and later explored similar mentor-student power collapses in his own films, where authority figures often destroy what they claim to protect. The West in Red River is not free, it is hierarchical. Survival depends on submission. Even the land itself feels hostile. Endless plains stretch on, offering no escape from Dunson's grip. The environment amplifies the cruelty, turning endurance into suffering. By the time the film reaches its climax, the violence has become personal. The struggle is no longer about cattle or territory. It is about reclaiming humanity from a man who surrendered his long ago. Eastwood admired how the film frames this conflict not as rebellion, but as necessity. All Red River is brutal because it exposes the lie at the heart of frontier leadership. Power does not civilize. It corrupts. And once it does, it demands blood to sustain itself. Number 6. High Noon, 1952. High Noon is brutal not because of how much violence it contains, but because of how mercilessly it exposes human cowardice. Clint Eastwood has long admired the film for its moral cruelty. This is a Western where the gunfight matters less than the silence that comes before it. The entire film unfolds in near real time, turning anticipation into torture. Gary Cooper's Marshal Will Kane walks from building to building, asking for help, and is rejected again and again. Each refusal is a wound. Eastwood has noted that this is one of the most psychologically violent structures ever used in a Western. The town Kane protected is willing to let him die to avoid inconvenience. Violence here is social before it becomes physical. Friends make excuses, leaders hide behind procedure, faith fails, marriage fails. Every institution that claims to uphold morality collapses when tested. By the time the outlaws arrive, Kane is already emotionally exhausted. The West does not betray him in a sudden moment. It abandons him slowly. When the gunfire finally erupts, it is quick and ugly. There is no choreography, no bravado. Kane is scared. He makes mistakes. He survives through desperation rather than skill. Eastwood later echoed this realism in his own Westerns, where gunfights feel chaotic and deeply unromantic. The film's final act delivers its most brutal statement. Kane throws his badge into the dirt and walks away. There is no speech, and no forgiveness. The gesture is devastating. The town does not deserve law. It did nothing to earn it. Eastwood admired this ending because it rejects reconciliation. Violence may be over, but trust is gone forever. High Noon is ruthless because it places responsibility where Westerns usually avoid it. Not on villains, on communities. It asks whether safety is worth anything if no one is willing to defend it. The answer the film gives is bleak. This is a Western where survival feels hollow. Kane lives, but his faith in people does not. And that loss cuts deeper than any bullet. Number 5. The Man Who Shot. Liberty Valance, 1962. If High Noon exposes cowardice, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance exposes the lie that replaces it. And Clint Eastwood has frequently cited this film as one of the most devastating Westerns ever made because it reveals how violence is rewritten into myth. Liberty Valance is not just a villain, he is a force of chaos. His brutality is casual and humiliating. He beats men not to kill them, but to remind them of their place. Eastwood admired how the film refuses to glamorize this cruelty. Valance's violence is ugly, mean, and deeply personal, but the film's true brutality lies elsewhere, in the truth that must be buried for society to move forward. James Stewart's Ransom Stoddard becomes a hero not because of what he did, but because of what people need to believe. John Wayne's Tom Doniphan commits the necessary violence, then erases himself from history so the myth can survive. And Eastwood has pointed out that this is one of the harshest moral trades in cinema. Civilization is built not on truth, but on a carefully managed lie. Violence becomes acceptable only when it can be denied. The man who actually pulls the trigger is condemned to obscurity, bitterness, and decay. The West here does not reward righteousness. It rewards storytelling. Newspapers matter more than facts. Legends matter more than lives. Eastwood later mirrored this theme in Unforgiven, where the truth about violence is twisted into entertainment and reputation. By the end of the film, nothing feels victorious. Valance is gone, but so is honesty. The town is civilized, but at the cost of integrity. Doniphan dies forgotten, having sacrificed everything for a future that refuses to acknowledge him. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is brutal because it tells us that progress demands erasure. Someone must be destroyed so others can feel safe believing a lie. And the West is built on that bargain. Number 4. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, 1948. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre is brutal because it proves that the frontier does not need guns to destroy men. Clint Eastwood has repeatedly cited this film as essential viewing because it strips violence down to its psychological core. The enemy here is not an outlaw or a corrupt authority. It is greed, and greed is far more efficient. From the moment gold enters the story, suspicion infects every interaction. What begins as partnership curdles into paranoia. Men stop sleeping, stop trusting, stop recognizing themselves. that Eastwood admired how the film treats this transformation as inevitable rather than tragic. Given enough temptation and isolation, the West will always rot from the inside. Humphrey Bogart's descent is one of the most frightening arcs in any Western-adjacent film. His character does not snap suddenly. He erodes. Small accusations grow sharper. Jokes disappear. Every glance becomes a threat. Eastwood later mirrored this slow corrosion in his own films, where violence often begins long before the first shot is fired. The brutality here is existential. Men are murdered not for survival, but for reassurance. Killing becomes a way to silence doubt. The gold itself becomes meaningless, a symbol of destruction rather than reward. When it is finally lost, scattered by fate and stupidity, the result feels cruelly appropriate. The West offers no refunds for moral compromise. What makes the film devastating is its refusal to comfort the audience. There is no lesson neatly learned, no redemption arc strong enough to outweigh the damage done. Laughter at the end is not relief, it is hysteria, a realization that everything suffered was for nothing. Eastwood understood that this was one of the West's darkest truths. Violence does not always come from conflict. Sometimes it comes from desire, and once unleashed, it consumes everything in its path, including the men who believed they were strong enough to control it. The treasure of the Sierra Madre is brutal because it denies meaning. It leaves only consequence. Number 3. The Searchers, 1956. The Searchers is brutal because it exposes the moral sickness at the heart of obsession. Clint Eastwood has often called this film foundational to his understanding of Western darkness. It is not a rescue story. It is a psychological descent stretched across years of hatred and refusal. John Wayne's Ethan Edwards is one of the most disturbing figures in American cinema. He is brave, skilled, determined, and poisoned by racism so deep it becomes his defining trait. Eastwood has emphasized that Ethan's violence is not heroic because it is fueled by ideology rather than necessity. His journey is not toward justice, but toward annihilation. The film's brutality lies in endurance. The search drags on for years. Landscapes blur into emotional wastelands. Hope decays. Relationships dissolve. Ethan's obsession consumes everyone around him, including the family he claims to protect. Eastwood later echoed this idea in his own westerns, where revenge corrodes identity until nothing recognizable remains. What makes The Searchers devastating is its moral ambiguity. The audience is never allowed to fully align with Ethan, yet they are trapped with him. His hatred is uncomfortable, persistent, and never excused. Violence here is not a solution. It is a symptom. The final moments are some of the most haunting in the genre. Ethan completes his mission but cannot enter the home. He remains outside, framed against the wilderness, a man who no longer belongs anywhere. Eastwood has pointed to this image as one of the most honest conclusions ever filmed. Violence does not integrate men back into society. It exiles them. The Searchers is brutal because it refuses closure. Evil is not neatly defeated. It is carried forward, internalized, and left unresolved. The West survives. The man does not. Number 2. Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Once Upon a Time in the West is brutal because it turns violence into fate. Clint Eastwood has spoken with deep admiration for Sergio Leone's operatic cruelty here, where brutality is not an interruption to the story, but its governing force. Every character moves as if already condemned. The film does not ask who will survive. It asks how long they can delay the inevitable. From its opening minutes, the film announces its intent. Silence stretches. Time slows. Men wait to die. Violence arrives without warning and without mercy. Eastwood understood that this was Leone's masterstroke. By draining gunfights of speed and excitement, he transforms them into executions. Each killing feels ceremonial, stripped of adrenaline and filled with dread. Henry Fonda's Frank is one of the most shocking villains in Western history. Cast against his heroic image, he embodies institutional brutality. He kills not out of passion, but convenience. Eastwood has pointed out that this is what makes Frank terrifying. He represents progress weaponized, railroads, capital, expansion. Violence is simply the tool that clears the path. The film's pacing is punishing by design. Scenes linger long past comfort. Characters stare at each other, as if measuring who deserves to exist longer. Leone forces the audience to sit inside the tension, to feel the weight of every decision. Eastwood later adopted this approach, allowing silence and stillness to carry moral gravity. What elevates the brutality is the film's worldview. The Old West is dying, but the new one is not kinder. It is colder, more efficient. The violence does not disappear. It becomes corporate. Men like Frank are not relics, they are prototypes. By the end, survival feels meaningless. The future belongs to systems, not individuals. Those who live do so by adapting to a world built on buried bodies. Once Upon a Time in the West is brutal because it suggests that civilization is not the opposite of savagery. It is. It's refinement. Number 1. The Wild Bunch, 1969. No Western is more brutal than The Wild Bunch. Clint Eastwood has consistently regarded it as the genre's breaking point, the moment when violence could no longer be romanticized. Sam Peckinpah did not merely depict brutality, he detonated it. From its opening massacre, the film declares war on illusion. Civilians die, children watch, blood sprays without restraint. Eastwood understood that this was not excess for shock value. It was a moral assault. Peckinpah forces the audience to confront what violence actually looks like when stripped of myth. The men at the center of the story are already dead in spirit. They know the world has moved on without them. Their violence is not rebellion. It is defiance against irrelevance. Eastwood admired how the film frames their final stand, not as heroism, but as surrender. They walk toward death because nothing else remains. What makes The Wild Bunch unbearable is its rhythm. Violence is slow motion and sudden chaos intertwined. Time fractures. Each death feels prolonged, unavoidable, and grotesquely intimate. Peckinpah refuses to let the audience escape the consequences. Every bullet matters. Every body falls hard. The final massacre is one of the most devastating sequences ever filmed. It is not cathartic. It is annihilating. No one wins. Nothing is restored. The West burns itself out in a storm of blood and betrayal. Eastwood absorbed this lesson fully. After The Wild Bunch, the Western could never pretend innocence again. This film stands at the end of the road. It does not mourn the death of the Old West. It exposes it as a lie that was always paid for in bodies. That is why Clint Eastwood calls it a masterpiece. Because it tells the truth no Western before it dared to say out loud. These films did not just reshape the Western, they dismantled it. Clint Eastwood understood that brutality was not a flaw of the genre. It was its confession, and once spoken honestly, it could never be taken back.